Okay, hello, Dr. Casey.
Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you again.
Yes.
Okay, so how is our all the EMITA? Okay, thanks for you being our NCKU EMITA to help enhance our students' English language proficiency. Okay, so since you are our EMITA, so we organize two workshop, EMI training workshop, okay, to help you to enhance being the TA teaching ability. Okay, so today we are so happy to invite the speaker, Dr. Casey. And Dr. Casey is the professor from the National Taiwan Normal University College Teacher Education. Okay, so his research field specialized in the EMI and international education. So he's because he specialized in the EMI, so our TA is going to have a good knowledge about the EMI from the data KLC. Okay, so let's give a big applause to welcome the data KLC.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming today. I know it's Friday, so I do appreciate you coming in. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so today's conversation is going to be about supporting student language in the EMI classroom. And my understanding is that as TAs, you're going to have two different roles. On one hand, you may be presenting academic content through video. I'm told that some of you are going to be making videos to help support students in their transition to EMI. Even if you're not making video, you may have TA sessions where you teach certain concepts to smaller groups. Everything that is involved in teaching content and making sure EMI students understand is going to fall under this English input part. And today we're going to mostly focus on that. We're going to be mostly focusing on how you as TAs can help students understand academic content, whether you're making it a video to support students or you're running small sessions. My understanding is that your other job is that you'll be supporting students' speaking practice in the EMI English Corner. I will discuss this a little bit at the end if there is time, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that. A lot of the things that I talk about for making videos will connect to things that you can do in the English Corner, but there are going to be some differences. So I'll spend a little bit of time on that today, trying to make this as relevant as possible. So today's outcome. By the end of today, my hope is that you'll be able to develop an EMI video lecture with one key concept, a clear outcome, a predictable pattern, and multimodality. So a good EMI video lecture is going to have those four things: a key concept, clear outcome, it'll follow a predictable pattern so that students can follow, and it will use multimodality, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So, as I said, these are the four characteristics of a good EMI video. So let's start the first one. I want to make today interactive, and I want to make it as relevant for you as possible. So before we even start, I want you to, in the chat, first tell me what subject you're associated with, okay? And then I want you to pick just one key concept, one small topic that you might have to teach to students in a study session or make a video for to support the lecture. I'd like everyone in the chat to type those two things. So one, what is your subject area? And two, one topic that you could potentially make a video on. So please put that in the chat now.
No.
Okay, fluency and debate skills, numerical methods, vector operations. Okay, calculus. Okay, biotechnology. Programming. Good, accounting. I'll give you about 30 more seconds. If you haven't put your stuff in the chat yet, go ahead and do that. Okay, someone from history and mechanics of materials. I like that we have a very diverse group here today. We have, from all different types of subjects. This is good. Perfect. Okay. Now I want you to, if you haven't put it in the chat yet, go ahead and keep doing that. But I want you to think about some of the topics that you've put in. When we make a video, we want to make sure that it's one key concept. So some of these that I'm seeing in the chat are actually really broad topics. It's kind of almost like you would expect maybe an entire chapter of a textbook to be on that topic. Trying to do that much in a video might be difficult because the perfect size video for a student is probably between 7 to 15 minutes at most, which means that within a chapter, so for example, some of these topics that you've done, you're not going to want to try to do a video on all of those things because many of the students that watch the video, they may need help with English, and giving them too much English at one time can be stressful and it can be hard for them to take in. So one of the things that I want you to think about as we continue today is if you have a shorter parts. Okay. Okay. So one of the reason we need to start with the key concept is that we need a clear outcome for our videos. So what is an outcome? An outcome tells the viewer what can they do after watching a video. And we want to make this very clear up front. When a student comes and opens the video to think about, and I'll give you a second, in the chat, think about the topic that you just gave me earlier. And I want you to think about first, is my topic something I could do in 15 minutes or less? All right. So some of you are going to have to think about a subtopic. And then the second thing I want you to think about is, are students going to need to remember something? Are they going to need to understand something? Or are they going to need to apply something? So to explain that one more time, remember is basically they need to learn facts. Understand is they need to understand how something works. And apply is they're going to have to maybe solve something or take those steps to do something. So in the chat now, I want you to tell me what your topic is again. So you might have to do a subtopic. And then is it remember, understand, or apply? And of course, if you have a question, feel free to put that in the chat as well. I'll give you about a minute to do that. Okay, so I see someone put in the chat, apply face expressions. And I remember the topic was debate before. So using facial expressions is debate. Good. Okay, how other ethnic groups, ethnic expression? Okay. See calculus. Let's understand. Yeah, I like what was put in the chat just now, to understand first and then apply. So the governing equation of fluid motion. Now, I'm not in your subject, so I don't necessarily know what that is. But yeah, oftentimes if they're going to have to solve certain equations, it is going to be apply. Okay, how to interact with a computer. We may want to, on that one, how to interact with a computer, we may want to make that a little bit more specific, because there are many ways that we can interact with a computer. But we'll talk about making things a little more specific in a moment. I'll give about 30 more seconds for those of you that want to try to get something in. Okay. Why? To understand how hydrology is important. Oh, okay. Facial expressions, understanding how different ethnic groups use nonverbal expression. Wonderful. Okay. So it's important, if you haven't got it in there, feel free to keep going. It's important to recognize where it falls on Bloom's taxonomy, because oftentimes our action is going to be based on this concept. What do we want students to do? Do we want them to remember something after this video? Do we want them to understand something, how things work? Or do we actually want them to go and do something, apply? Now, one of the things that we'll need to think about is that while these verbs are good, we could say students will be able to remember, or students will be able to understand, or students will be able to apply. oftentimes those verbs are not descriptive enough. They give the general idea of what we want students to be able to do, but these verbs are better off as broad categories, not specific descriptions. So we want to, within these categories, look for different verbs. Now, if you go online, as I said, as you can see here, this thing is called Bloom's taxonomy. If you go online and you type in Bloom's taxonomy verbs, you're going to find a whole table of verbs that could be used at each one of these levels, even at the higher levels. And on my desk here in my office, I actually have that list, because every time I am planning a lesson or I am, planning a workshop like today, I look at my table of verbs to decide, well, what exactly is it that I want either my students or the participants to be able to do? For you, I wanted to make this a little bit easier. If you're interested in looking for that whole table with all the different verbs, you can Google it and find it. As I was thinking about your role as a TA and what you will be doing in terms of making videos to support students or working in small study sessions, I thought that these verbs on the screen probably are the ones that will fit best. So for example, you may want students by the end of something to be able to define something. Defining meaning they can tell you what this thing means. So what is, I'll just take something quickly from the chat. What is hydrology? And so after watching the video, students will be able to define hydrology, for example. Just maybe you want students to be able to describe. So for example, looking in the chat, I see how to read a firm financial statement. So maybe students will be able to describe the parts of a firm financial statement so that they're able to, that will help them be able to read it. They know in this part they read this part they read this, for example. Another example, I'll do the facial expressions. Students will be able to describe the facial expressions, the nonverbal expressions of different ethnic groups. Okay, that may be your outcome. Some of you are going to have to do list and labeling, particularly if you work in the sciences, where maybe you have some type of diagram and it shows the way that a system works, and students should be able to label or list the parts of that system. So these four verbs fall under remember, when we want students to remember. And hopefully you can see whether these verbs connect to your topic or not. But sometimes we do want to go to the understand, which means explain. I'll use the systems example again. So if you consider the systems example, there are two things that we could do if we have a system here. We could label the parts of the system, or we could explain how that system works. So label is going to tell you what the parts are, but explain is going to tell you how these things interact and work together. And so for many of you, that may be what you need to target. I'm going to see if there's a good example. Okay, we'll take computers, for instance. Maybe we're talking about the system of the computer, how that might work. So that might be a good example for how we would use explain or the understand topic. At the apply level, for many of you, it's going to be solve. But for some of you, it may also be you want students to produce some type of thing. But let's do with solve for a moment. And I'll take the example from the chat that was about using the governing equation of fluid motion. Students will learn about this equation and I guess how to solve this equation, and then they should be able to go and solve problems using that after watching the video. So in many ways, the students will be doing apply. So I want to emphasize that these verbs are not the only options, okay? And I do recommend that you go to, if you think these verbs do not work for your subject, then I recommend that you Google Bloom's taxonomy verbs so that you can, verbs will work for your subjects. So what I'd like to do is I'd like you to, again, think about your topic, and I want you to start making the first part of the outcome. Now, if you recall, outcome starts with students will be able to. So all of you should start with that. Then you're going to do an action, which will be one of these verbs, or if you think there's another verb that works, then you should do that. But I do want to caution. There's one thing I forgot to say, and it's very important. You should not do verbs like learn, know, or understand. Because again, those kind of like what we had here. I already talked understand is not specific enough. But we also don't want to use verbs like learn or know, because those are also not specific enough. So make sure that try to use these verbs, but if you think you need another one, give it a shot, and I'll give you some feedback. Students will be able to pick a verb and then your concept. So this is going to connect to the topic. So you've already told me your topics. Students will be able to this action concept. I'd like you to take a moment and put that in the chat. We will talk about the last part, conditions, next. But I'd like you to put this one in the chat first. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the ones that you've given to me, and I'm going to give you some feedback on each one. But I want to, before I do that, I want to go back to this concept of pick a key concept. Remember that these videos that you make should be short. They should be no longer than 15 minutes. Typically, they'll be between 7 and 15 minutes. But if they are shorter than that, it's probably okay. And I want to emphasize this point again. Why do we want to make shorter videos with clear outcomes? Because many of our students taking courses in English is going to be very new for them. And they may not be used to having that much English input at one time, particularly about the difficult concepts that many of our courses cover. And so by making sure that it's very focused and it's short, they can focus on one thing and making sure they understand that one thing. And then they can move on to other shorter videos to help build their ability to understand longer, I guess we'll call it longer discourse, longer sessions of language, if you will, longer input. Okay, so I bring this point up because as we look at some of these may not be as specific as we'd like them to be. The topic still seems to cover a broad range. And so for our concept here, we're going to want to make sure that it is very specific. So let me go through some of these. I'm going to start. Students will be able to describe the design thinking process. This one is probably pretty good. Okay, assuming that the design thinking process is not too complex and is something that we could describe in 15 minutes, maybe in a couple steps. Assuming that that's the case, then this would be a good topic. If the design thinking process, though, is fairly complex, then you may want to think about dividing it into sections. So maybe talking about students will be able to describe this part of the design thinking process and making it into multiple videos. But just looking at this as a non-content expert of design, this one looks pretty good. The next one, students will be able to describe and define equations in engineering mathematics. So this one might be too broad. I'm going to imagine, again, I'm not in engineering, I'm in education. But I'm going to guess that engineering mathematics involves a lot of different types of equations, a lot of different types of things that have to be solved. So for this one, students will be able to describe and define equations in engineering mathematics. You're going to want to focus on one type of equation. So think about one equation that they would need to be able to do. Now, the other thing I want to comment on this particular one, and I see this in other ones as well, define. I'm going to recommend that you try to only use one verb for the video. Again, these videos should be short, and they should be very clear and to the point. So when we add multiple verbs, that means we've got to do multiple things in the videos, and that's going to make them probably too long. So if describing and defining the equation are two different things, then you may want to consider doing separate outcomes and separate videos. But also, you may want to think, is it really describe and define? When we talk about equations, do we want them to describe and define equations, or do we want them to be able to solve equations? Again, I'm not in engineering, so I'm not sure what you need to do in your field. But you may want to also consider solve for that particular outcome. All right, the next one. Students will be able to distinguish the types of compounds and define the chemical reaction. So this first part, I think, is clear. Assuming that there's only a limited amount of compounds that could be described. Now, if there are, countless, many compounds that they would need to distinguish, then you may need to become more specific. But generally speaking, it seems like students will be able to distinguish the types of compounds. That is good. But like I had mentioned with the last one, and now we're getting complicated. Define the chemical reaction. I think those two probably need to be in separate videos. You might have to have video 1, students will distinguish types of compounds, and then video 2, students will define chemical reactions. So consider breaking that up into 2 outcomes, but overall that one looks pretty good. Next one, students will be able to acquire basic coding ability. This one is very broad, okay? So my knowledge of coding is that there are many different types of languages, and within those languages, there are many different types of functions that need to be performed. You're going to want to focus on one of those. So for example, students will be able to, you may want to do, students may be able to write an if-then statement using, Python or whatever. You're going to want to be much more specific because basic coding ability, that is an entire course. And so you've got to focus on one small thing. Next one, students will be able to identify the sources of historiography. So I don't know much about this topic, so it's hard for me to comment. But like I said with some of the other topics, as long as there aren't too many sources or too many steps, then this can be a fine outcome. But if this is like, for example, an entire chapter of a book or even multiple chapters of a book, then it's probably too broad. You as a content expert will have to determine that. Students will be able to analyze the financial data. Again, we can analyze financial data in many different ways. So you may want to focus on something specific, some specific analysis of financial data. So you're going to want to, again, make some adjustments there. Make sure that it's very clear what you want them to do. And I'm going to give all of you an opportunity in a moment to redo these. Students will be able to explain basic social challenges linked to the current pandemic of COVID-19. I think this one's pretty good. I think this one's pretty clear. Assuming that we can say the social challenges in a few categories, I think this one works. Students will be able to design a method to increase microalgae quantity and quality. So since I'm not in biotechnology, I'm not exactly sure, but does quantity and quality need to be addressed separately? Will this topic be too broad? Or is it okay to combine those two, quantity and quality? I'm not sure. You as a subject expert are going to have to decide. But remember, if your video becomes longer than 15 minutes, it's not going to be as helpful for students. So you want to be very focused on one subtopic. All right, two more. Students will be able to identify vector operations used in complex calculations. Okay, so I think this one is good. Identifying vector operations. The only thing that I'm questioning is complex calculations. Can we be more specific about that so that our video is succinct? I'm not sure. As a non-mathematics expert, I'm not sure. But complex calculations seems kind of broad. So you may want to dig into a specific type. Finally, students will be able to analyze the events of a certain time and place using a specific IR theory. This one is probably too broad. IR theory, you're going to want to specify the IR theory that you're going to discuss in your video. Assuming, because you say specific IR theory, that makes me think that there are many. You're going to want to focus on one. And then you may want to even, I think the first part, events of a certain time and place, is probably okay. But if you can make that more specific, that may be helpful also. Okay. So all of you have given me an outcome, and I've given you some feedback, some places where you may want to make it a little bit more clear, a little bit less broad. And the reason for this is going to be because of the next step, conditions. So what are conditions? You do not necessarily have to put conditions into an outcome, but it can often be very helpful in your planning. The better your outcome is, the easier it is going to be to make your video or to run your session. The reason I always start with outcomes, whether it's workshops or the classes that I teach, is that it makes planning what to do so much easier. I know exactly what my students are going to have to be able to do, and I find ways to help them do that. And it's the same as a TA. You know, the clearer you are about the goal, the easier it will be to present the information or help the students in the way that you need to help them. So conditions give specific details. They give you specific details about what students should be able to do. And I want to give you the example of today's workshop. Develop an EMI video lecture with one key concept, a clear outcome, a predictable pattern, and multimodality. So obviously today's workshop is much longer than a 15-minute video. We do have 2 hours together today. So it does make a little bit of sense that, you know, mine is a little bit more complex. But let's break this down a little bit. Develop. This is my action. EMI video lecture. This is my topic. If I only had this, participants will be able to develop an EMI video lecture. There are many, many ways that you could do this. There are many strategies, there are many formats that you could do. And like in some of your outcomes as well, for example, if we just said students will be able to solve an equation, well, there may be many ways that we can solve an equation and still get the correct answer. So we want to be specific. Exactly how are we going to do this? So with the example of the equation, how exactly should students be able to solve it? If there are 4 different ways to solve it, which way is this video going to teach? Being very specific about the goal. And so you can see those specific things here. You can see those specific things here. One key concept. You should have one key concept. You should have one clear outcome. You should have a predictable pattern, and you should use multimodality. Sorry, I've lost my mouse. There we go. Okay. So when we're making conditions, there are some things that you want to think about. So one of the things is that words to use, particularly if you're doing things like describe, list, you may want to specify the words that students should be able to use at the beginning. This can be very important for EMI students because they may not have the specific words to describe things that you want them to be able to describe. So if we give them the words to use up front, they know what to listen for. They know what to expect as they watch the rest of the video. There will be less surprises. It'll be more predictable, and that will help them comprehend better. So we can create conditions for words to use. That's a possibility. Sometimes we may want features or characteristics. So for example, this is a simple example, describe an animal, okay? If we said students will be able to describe an animal, we can further add conditions in terms of eating habits and in terms of habitat. Because as you know, there's many ways we could describe an animal. So what exactly do we want them to describe? In this case, eating habits and habitat. Another way is method or framework. So particularly, we've talked about the math example. Is there a specific way that they should solve it? Are there specific things that they should do? Conditions define that. And again, it makes it clear for you as you're developing your video, and it makes it clear for the students. What exactly should they be able to do at the end? So I'd like to revisit this one more time, and this is the last time we'll do outcomes. I want you to think about the outcome that you put in earlier. And I want you to think about the feedback that I gave you in terms of things that you should change. And I'd like you to put that outcome in the chat. But this time, I also want you to think about conditions. So fix the part, take the feedback I offered before, and fix the action and concept as needed, and then add conditions to make it more specific. I'll give you some time to put that in the chat. And of course, if you have questions at this point, you can feel free to put those in the chat as well. I'll give you a few more minutes to provide me your outcome. Okay, so we have one in the chat now. Students will be able to list historical sources during the medieval period. I think this one's a pretty good one. Well done. I like this one. Students will be able to explain basic social challenges linked to the current pandemic of COVID-19 regarding the SDGs. That is very specific because there are a set of SDGs and they can use that to describe the social challenges. I think that's very well done. Okay, good. Students will be able to understand how hydrology is crucial in managing our water resources for the future. Great. Give about one more minute for any others to come in. But the ones that have come in so far, I feel like we're on the right track now. We are having some very specific outcomes that will help you make a very targeted video or a very targeted lesson if you do live study sessions. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward because of time. But I want to emphasize before I move to the next part that outcomes are going to be very beneficial for you, whether you, like I said, are making a video, whether you are doing a study session with students, or even in English Corner, if you are participating in English Corner, because it gives you a targeted goal. It gives you and the student you're working with a targeted goal to work for. And the more specific your outcome is, the better you'll be able to determine whether we met the goal or not. I see two more things that have come in. Students will be able to implement Python code to create a paper, scissors, stone robot. Perfect. That is a very clear outcome. And the other one, students will be able to describe differential rules in engineering mathematics when looking at solutions for first order differential equations. I like that one as well. It seems very specific. There's a specific type of equation and describing the rules for it. It's very clear. Students will be able to identify periodic function elements in Fourier series problem solving. Again, that's very, very specific. So well done. I'm very happy about this. I feel like we have moved forward on this. So I'm very happy to see the progress here. So let's move on. I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom left for a second, just so we can know where we've been and where we are. So we've identified one key concept, and you see that throughout today's workshop, you have worked on making that more and more focused, which is good. And then we talked about writing a clear outcome. So a statement so that students know exactly what to expect in the video. What should they be able to do by the end of the video? Because if they watch the video and then they can't do that thing at the end, they know that, oh, maybe I should watch this video again and try to catch the key points that I missed. So the better that your outcome is, the better experience they will have when watching the video. So now we need to get into how we're going to actually make these videos, or again, if you're doing a live class, how are we going to give our students a predictable pattern? Because the more predictable the pattern, the more easy it is for them to comprehend. They know what to expect. They know what to listen for. So the pattern I'm going to share with you is not necessarily the only way that you could do this. And in many cases, in some of your subject areas, you may need to find a different pattern or take this pattern and change it a little bit so that it fits with your subject. As you know, we have people from all different subjects today. So I have to give you just a general formula. But if there are things that work in your discipline that might be better than this, I encourage you to make your own. So, what is the predictable pattern? First, you're going to introduce the topic. Then you're going to state the outcome. You'll then connect to background. You'll present the first part of that concept, and then you'll give some chance for them to reflect or pause, or if it's in a live class, maybe actually doing something. And you'll go through those two, present a part, reflect, until you've achieved the entire outcome. And then finally, you'll restate the outcome. So let's go through each one of these individually. The first part we've spent most of today already talking about, making sure that we have one topic or key concept. So what you'll do is you can simply start, in today's lecture, you will learn this key concept. So if we take some of the examples that we have here, we might say, today you will learn about the basic social challenges in COVID-19. Okay? Or today you will learn about why hydrology is crucial in managing our water resources. Today you will learn how to create a paper, scissors, stone robot. Okay, so you can see that our outcome is already starting to help us create the script for our video, or gives us exactly what we might say in the classroom or in the English corner. Now, one thing, this first sentence, in today's lecture you will learn, we could say that in many different ways. And you don't necessarily have to say it exactly like this, but consistency can be important. So if you decide that in video 1 I'm going to use this sentence, you may want to use that same sentence throughout your videos, because students are going to, you don't want students to get overloaded with new language. We want students to be able to pinpoint exactly what the topic is. So if we always use the pattern, in today's lecture you will learn, then they know that that's a signal. Okay, right now the person is telling me about the topic. It's a signal for them to think, okay, topic. I need to pay attention to know exactly what today's topic is. And they can catch just the words that might be new to them. Okay? These signposts or signals are going to be important. So consistency of language is something you should think about. And this is just one example, but it's one that you can use. In today's lecture, you will learn. Following the same idea of patterns, we can do, after watching this lecture, you will be able to, and then the outcome. Okay? And generally speaking, you probably are going to want to cut, if you're going to use PowerPoint for your video, kind of like I'm using PowerPoint today, you may want to split these up into 2 different sections, okay? We're going to talk more about that later, but I want to emphasize that now. Since I put both of these sentences on one slide, I don't want you to think that you should do the same. You should probably have one slide, just like we had today, that has the topic. So on this slide, I would say, if I were making a video, in today's video, you will learn if I were making a video, I would follow that pattern. Okay. So the first 2 sections are actually pretty easy, and it follows a pattern that you can always use in every video. So you don't have to think too much about what you're going to say at the beginning. But the next part is when things get maybe a little bit more complicated. You're going to have to really think about the topic. And this section is connecting to background. So particularly when you're working in a non-dominant language. So for many of our students, English will be their non-dominant language. It's not their first language. So they may have some struggles with it. It's often helpful for them to connect to background information before they learn new information. It can help increase their comprehension. I want to see, I don't have that slide. But Ernesto Macaro, he's one of the prominent researchers in English medium instruction. He talks about this idea that the more students know about the topic, the better they'll be able to comprehend the new information, even if they have a low language ability. And so in our videos, we want to get students to think about what they already know, so that can help increase their comprehension for what they're going to have to do. And I want to, I guess, take myself as an example. So my level of Mandarin Chinese is my listening is probably at a B2 level, which is upper intermediate, which means that my listening is generally pretty good. I can listen to, speeches in Chinese. I can watch the news and be fine. But I'll take the news example. If the news is talking about a news story that I know a lot about, I find that comprehending that news story, is fairly easy for me. I don't necessarily know every single word, but I can generally, at the end of that news story, tell you, what they talked about. But if it's a news story that maybe I'm not familiar with, or a topic that I don't know very well, my comprehension is far less. So in the last 2 weeks, I attended a lecture on English medium instruction that was in Chinese, and I understood, I would say, a good 98% of it. I could tell you at the end of that 2-hour lecture everything the person talked about. But I also attended a shorter talk on, I think it was on agriculture. It had something to do with plants and seeds. I could tell you that that's what the topic was about, but I couldn't tell you much of the details because that's not my field. And the same thing for our students. The more that we can help them think about what they know, the better. So in this section of the video, after you've introduced the topic and you've stated the outcome, you want to get students to think about what they already know. Now, this can be done in many ways. So for example, if we go back into some of these examples that you've put into the chat, the Python code to maybe do the paper, scissors, stone robot, maybe they've already learned how to do one of the statements that they need to make to be able to do that. So in this part, you might say, think about a previous video, or think about when you were previously doing something. How how did you create this? And you give the students some time to think about what they already know. For the one about COVID-19, we may have them connect to background of their life. How has the pandemic affected you? Take a moment to think about how has it changed your life? How has it changed the lives of people you know? Different topics are going to require different things. And those examples that I gave you aren't necessarily the ones that fit best. But you're going to want to get them to think about it. So here are some examples of some language that you can use to help students connect to background. The first one, before we begin, please pause the video and write what you know about, okay? And so you may give them just a general topic or something you think they know about and have them write it down. Have you seen the following words? Pause the video and think about the words you know and don't know. So maybe if, for example, if you're having them like label a system, maybe you put the key words on the screen and have them think about what they already know about those words. Another example, you should have previously learned how to solve problems by blah, blah, blah. So if students have watched a previous video and they know how to solve an equation using one technique, then you can show the problem and say, pause the video and see if you can solve the problem for the answer using this strategy. You get them to think about what they already can do. Now, will they actually pause the video? Well, that's up to them. But we give them the opportunity to try to connect to the background so that the new stuff that we teach them can be easier. Now, if you are in a real classroom situation where you're doing tutoring groups, or if you're in English Corner, then you can actually have students do these activities. Start with a question or a prompt to get them to think about what they already know, and then you're going to build on that prompt later. And so I already had said this. I thought I didn't have this slide, but I do. Macaro 2018 states that sound knowledge of the topic area helps students to overcome deficiencies in linguistic knowledge. In other words, if students don't have a lot of language ability, if they have really solid knowledge of the topic, it can help them understand better, even if they don't have the language to understand completely. And so getting them to think about what they know first will help improve their comprehension. So, what are some things that you could do at this section of the video? I'm curious the ideas that you might have from your different subjects. I'd like you to take a moment and put it in the chat. What might you say to have students connect to the background for your topic, for your video? Okay? Let me know in the chat what you might have students do, what you might have them think about, or write down, or do. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And of course, if at this point you have any questions, please let me know in the chat. Okay, ask about personal experience with COVID-19. I think that's a good way for your topic. One alternative, since you also mentioned in your topic about the SDGs, if you didn't want to do the personal experience, you could also, try to tap into what do you know about these SDGs? And then you can connect the two together. Yeah, I think that's a good prompt. Ask about how much they know about the water shortage issue in Taiwan. Ask students to think about a good design they've seen or used in their daily lives. That's also a good one. One thing on the design one, I like what you put there, but an alternative is you could also show them an actual design and say, I want you to pause the video and think about what makes this a good design so that the students can think about a specific example. Okay, UN has a goal to achieve. I like that one. So the UN has a goal to achieve the 17 SDGs by 2030. However, since the pandemic occurred almost 3 years ago, do you think those 17 goals could be achieved by 2030? I think that's a very good one. And one thing that you might want to do is on that slide, have the 17 goals. And you could even say, which ones do you think can be met by 2030? Which ones do you think can't? I like that. All right, show a complex differential equation that cannot be developed by ordinary means, but is easy to solve by iterative operations. I like that. I'm not a math person, so I don't necessarily completely understand, but I can imagine you showing an equation for them to think about and how that can connect to things later. So I think that's a really good example. Okay, ask about what historical materials are found in their environment. Yeah, so what kind of sources can you find where you are? I think that's very good. I'll give about 1 more minute to see if yes, I think that's a great one. Show them a figure and ask them to identify what materials do you see here. I think that's a great prompt. All right. So it seems like you've got a very good idea of how to do this. And I want to emphasize that this should be one of the first things that happens in our video. So we should always, say, I'd like you to pause the video and think about this and then present it. And I've given you some ways that you can do that. Same thing in class. I think if you are doing English Corner with someone and you have a specific goal, always start by getting them to connect to background. Or if you're doing a tutoring session for your subject, always get them to connect to their background. That can really help the students better understand the things that you're going to be teaching. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know that I did a really good job of demonstrating that today. Because there were so many things that I wanted to tell you today, I think I may have skipped this part. But generally, we're always going to want to get people to connect to their background and think about what they know so that we can build on it. Okay. So in our next part, the next part is kind of a recurring cycle. Okay, and it's going to depend on your topic. So for some of your topics, you're going to be able to cut them into even smaller pieces. So for example, if it's a like if solving equation takes multiple steps, then you may want to focus on each step separately. Or for example, if you wanted to, we'll take design for an example. Maybe there's, specific aspects of design that we want to cover. We want to cut it into small parts and give our students time to reflect and pause. Because often our outcome does, even if we're very specific about our outcome, it often does have multiple parts. And in order to help increase comprehension for our students, we want to present one part at a time and give them time to think about it before we build on the next part. And while I don't know that I did a very good job of connecting to background in today's workshop, I think what I have done is I have demonstrated this concept about present one part and reflect. And I want to go back so that you can kind of see this. So if you recall that our outcome has 4 parts: one key concept, a clear outcome, a predictable pattern, and a multi-modality. And you'll probably identify now we're in the predictable pattern part. But at each part, the key concept, I had you type your key concept in the chat. So we did this part, I had you put it in the chat. I gave you some feedback on it. And knowing that we were going to revisit this again, we left it there. But I gave you time to pause and think. Then I presented clear outcomes. But even this part I broke into small pieces. We started with just the action, and I had you write just that part first. And then I introduced the next part, which is the conditions. And then again, we paused, and I let you practice it, think about it, do it. And sort of the same thing here. The connecting background, I just had you give me some examples. So in your videos, you're going to want to do the same thing. And in English Corner, if you're working in English Corner, again, you may want to do the same things. Why did the student come to English Corner today? What do they need to achieve? Okay, how can I break this into smaller parts? Maybe show them how to do it and then give them time to practice. Then show them the next part and give them time to practice. The better that you can do this, the more comprehensible the teaching is going to be. Because again, when we're working with, when students come to these videos and they're not necessarily comfortable with English medium instruction, they're not used to having these long spans of language. They're going to need small little parts so that they can take that little part, try to understand it, and then add on. So, I guess following this same pattern, I'd like to do this again. I'd like you to think about this. I want you to think about your outcome. And I want you to answer 2 things. First, how many parts does it have? I want you to think about how many parts it has. And if you can tell me just kind of the title of those parts, like how you broke it into pieces. I'll give you a few minutes to think about this. You don't necessarily have to tell me what they'll do for the reflection, but tell me what are the parts of your topic that you'll cut it up into so that they have small pieces to think about. I'll give you a few minutes. Okay, that's one possible way to divide it. International levels, national levels, and then personal levels. Yeah. Alternatively, since you're using SDGs, you could divide it by the specific SDGs or groups of SDGs. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. You can do that within each subtopic. But that's going to probably end up being quite a long video if you try to do all SDGs. So you may want to think about, going back to the outcome and maybe making it even smaller in that case. Okay, I like how you divided that into two pieces. So how hydrology is crucial, and then what are the factors specifically in Taiwan around the world for fighting the water stress? Yeah, I think you've divided it into two clear parts there. Well done. I'll give about 1 more minute for anyone else that would like to share their idea. Okay. To make sure that we have enough time, I'm going to go ahead and move on. But I hope that all of you have at least taken some time to think about your topic and how you can cut it into parts. And I want to emphasize one more time that if the smaller the part, the easier it is for our students to be able to understand it. So again, whether you're going to be making a video or you're going to be doing a study group or working in English Corner, the better that you can break things into small manageable parts, the better chance that the student will be able to achieve the outcome. So great teachers are able to take the small parts and make sure students get clarity and practice on those small parts and then put them together. So in the final section of the video, and I guess just to recap, we've introduced the topic, we've stated the outcome so that students know exactly what they should be able to do by the end of the video. We've connected to their background knowledge so that they have a good starting place to build on top of with the things that we present. Then we break our bigger outcome into smaller parts. We present a little information, and then we give students a chance to reflect, pause, or do something. And we do that until we've met the entire outcome. At the end, you're going to, At the end, you're going to want to restate the outcome. You're going to want to say, now that you've watched this video, you should be able to do this. To remind students why they watched it And also for them to self-check, can I actually do that now? Or do I need to watch the video again? Did I miss something? Because particularly in the case of these videos, my understanding is that these are going to be students, they're going to be used to help prepare students for EMI, in which case we want them to be able to identify when they understand and when they don't, and to mimic good strategies of going back to the video to try to find out where they missed something. Okay, so it serves two purposes. One, so that the student can know if they achieved the goal, and also possibly to give them some practice to self-assess. So here are some examples of things that could be said. After watching this video, you should now be able to do this. You may also say, pause the video and try this practice. So for example, some of you that are working with equations, like solving equations, or even the outcome that was related to creating the Python program for rock, paper, scissors. You can ask students to pause the video and see if they can do it. With the case of the programming, you probably don't need to show the answer, but maybe you do in some cases. In the case of the equations, you're probably going to want to show the answer. So within restate the outcome, you're going to state the outcome, give an example practice, and then you may give the answer and you can say, how did you do? If you got it correct, great. If not, watch the video again and see if you can identify your error. These three sentences will work when they have to solve something. For those of you that it's not necessarily about solving, for example, maybe it's describing, you may or may not give an answer at the end. You may just say, after watching this video, you should now be able to do this. How well can you do it? If you think you can do it well, great. If you still are confused, watch the video again. And that's how you should end the video, to make sure that students are actually getting what they're supposed to. So I kind of want to take you through an activity that you could possibly do at the end of the video as well. I just introduced this, what we called a predictable pattern of a video. Introduce the topic, state the outcome, connect to background, present and reflect, and then restate the outcome. I'm curious how confident you feel about using this pattern to make videos or to teach in a tutoring session or the English corner. How confident do you feel about using it? If you feel like this is no problem, it's easy, I want you to put a 3 in the chat. If you think you need some practice, like you get it, but you need some practice on your own, I'd like you to put a 2. If you think you need some practice and some help, like you get it, but you need some help, I'd like you to put a 1. If you're not sure that you can do this, like you feel like this is pretty complicated, put in a 0. Okay, so far everybody's put in a 2. And I would say that's probably pretty normal for right now. Today it's a short session and it's online, so it's a little bit more difficult. Unfortunately, I can't, being online, I can't work with you face to face, and we can't share as well, though we're doing our best with the chat. But yeah, I would say that need some practice and some help. I would say that's probably a pretty good place given the time that we've had today. So good. I think that's a good. Oh, sorry. Need some practice on your own. Yes, I would say that's a pretty good place to be. If you need some practice and some help, I think that's an okay place to be also. Great. So I guess, again, I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom left corner of your screen, and I want to kind of review where we've been and where we are now. So we've talked about one key concept. You now can write a clear outcome with an action verb, the concept, and some specifications. You've also learned to follow a pattern for the video to help try to increase student comprehension of the video. By following that pattern, we are going to help support their language needs. If we were to just lecture for 15 minutes in the video, then students would not have the language support that they needed. And so the pattern can help support their language needs. The final thing that we're going to talk about today is this idea of multimodality, or multiple modes. Essentially, modes are different ways that we can express meaning. They're different ways that we can communicate. Okay, so for example, we can, of course, use language. I am using language to talk to you right now. We can use gestures. I just went like this, and to kind of try to enhance the meaning of my words. So gestures can help too. Some of you have been giving me today like the thumbs up. You've pressed the thumbs up thing on WebEx. So you're giving me a visual. And even though you haven't said anything, I know what you mean. Okay? There are basically 5 modes that we can talk about. Linguistic, which is language. Visual, which is, pictures and such. Oral, which is what we do with sound. Gestural is making gestures. And spatial, how we work with space. When you're teaching in an EMI course, whether you're making a video for students, or you're teaching a study session, or you're working in English Corner, the more modes that you can use to help students understand what you mean, the better. Generally, you should try to never have less than 2 modes. So even today, I've been speaking and I've been giving you visuals on the screen. So I've always had at least 2 modes. But also, like I'm doing a gesture right now, sometimes I have 3 modes, where I said 3 modes, 2 modes, to even enhance it more. The more modes, the better. And so as you develop your videos or your tutoring sessions, you're going to want to think about how many modes can I bring in to help students understand? And so I want to go through each one of these modes individually. As I said, linguistic has to do with language. It's either about spoken words or written words. And today's presentation has a lot of that. Oftentimes, for important points, it's best to have both. So if something, obviously not every word that I'm saying to you today is on my PowerPoint. But the most important points are, because I want to make sure that those are emphasized. So within the linguistic mode, we can try to include both spoken and written. The more we do that, the easier it will be for our students. Because for many students, reading is not necessarily the problem. Maybe listening is difficult for them, or speaking is difficult for them. The more modes that we can include, the better. And I also kind of want to make this connection to English Corner, because again, that was one of the roles that I was told that many of you will be doing. When we're getting students to try to speak, we want them to engage in the spoken mode. Sometimes it's helpful if they have something written down to help them do that too. So for example, maybe we give them a list of words and say, I want you to try to explain this using this list of words. So they've got something written and they're trying to produce something spoken. Sometimes it may be helpful for you to provide like sentence stems or sentence parts. I've done this earlier today, like here. After watching this video, you should now be able to, and then you fill something in. Sometimes it's helpful for students that are trying to practice speaking for them to have a template. Because in many of our subjects, we use very formulaic language. We use the same type of language. We just change a part of it to be topic specific. So if we give students maybe parts of sentences and they fill in with the rest of the content, that can help them produce language too. So in your English corners, oh, I went the wrong way, sorry. In the English corners or in your tutoring sessions, if you're trying to get students to produce language, try to see how you can get them to speak with some written support if they need it. And then, of course, in your videos, the more that you can have spoken with the written, the better, particularly for the important points. And so, I guess, particularly with video, we can do closed caption. We can have the captions at the bottom of the video as you speak. So that's one thing that you may want to consider too, is adding those captions to videos to help support the students as well. I want to skip over our graphic and go to the oral mode because students often get confused with the linguistic and the oral. So oral is about sound, and you may be thinking, oh, well, isn't speaking sound? Well, yes, it is. But we typically keep speaking with the linguistic. In the oral, we're talking more about kind of what we do with that sound. So sometimes it's about tone of voice. If we want to emphasize a word, we might say, now this word, you notice I put emphasis on it, that can be helpful for comprehension as well. So combining the linguistic, what we're saying, with some emphasis, emphasizing the important key points. But also you'll notice that silence can also be part of the oral. So for example, our first word, oral, is blah, blah, blah. I put silence on both sides. And I'm using the linguistic and the oral mode together to help students comprehend. I would recommend that in your videos, you try to utilize that technique. If you're writing a script, put lines at places where you should pause before you record the video. Because then you know that you can use this oral mode to help students comprehend the language. And of course, this applies in the class. In English corner as well. As you're speaking, think about how you can emphasize things with the tone of voice and use silence to help them understand and catch key points. The visual. This is images. And I don't know if you've noticed at this point, but in the upper right-hand corner of all of these slides, I've had an image to try to represent the meaning. Linguistic, the language, oral, emphasizing, so she's, making something even louder, and visual. Many of your subjects are going to have diagrams. You're going to have things like tables or, equations. Giving students those visuals is very important. It helps support the things that you're doing with the linguistic mode and perhaps with the oral mode as well. Generally speaking, the more visuals, the better. In fact, if you think you can explain a concept only using visuals, then do it. Because in many subjects, if we show the visuals, students will see that and be able to do it. One of my jobs here at NTNU is training bilingual teachers who will go out to teach bilingual education in the secondary, in junior high schools and high schools. And many of the teachers that take my class are from physical education, from PE, doing sports. And I tell them, actually doing your subject through English can be quite easy, because as long as students see you doing the action, they'll understand what to do, even if they don't know the English. So in all of our subjects, the more that we can show students visually what we want them to do, the better. Gestural is about how we use the body. Okay? Now, Generally speaking, this is hard to do online. We do have, things like the annotate where I can draw on the slide. And, of course, we've got this video, so I can, make hand gestures and facial expressions. But this is typically much easier to do face to face, where you can actually point to something on a slide, or you can model. On video, you can model some things, you can demonstrate some things, but sometimes it's hard. The more that you're able to do this on your video or in your teaching practices in English Corner or study sessions, the better. So as I said, it'll be easier face to face, but technology gives you lots of options. If you have the technology where you can, draw on your PowerPoint or have some type of pointer and you can circle different things, that can enhance comprehension. It can draw students' attention to what they're supposed to be focusing on. Even if they don't understand all the language, the gesture can help try to get them to catch the key point. Gestures can be very important, though we do have the technology to help with it. It can be more difficult on video. The final is spatial. And spatial is about how you place things. Now, generally, this is kind of a design concept, so how you're going to place things in a space. But we can think about spatial for, the concept of like making videos or presenting things to people. It can be about how we organize our PowerPoint. And it can also be about how we organize our lecture, pauses for reflection, like I've talked about earlier. How do we space the information out so that students understand? So that's how we can kind of use spatial in teaching. But I want to make this more concrete for you. So we've talked about these 5 modes: linguistic, visual, oral, gestural, and spatial. Let me combine this into one concept. And that concept is what we'll call KISS your lecture. So KISS stands for keep it short and simple. So how does this work? Well, first, make sure that you only have one idea on the slide, especially if you're working with students that don't have very high proficiency. This rule I've basically followed today, but I could be criticized for maybe putting too much. But I expected that you as EMI TAs would be able to handle bigger chunks on a slide. So I've included that. But you'll have to decide whether in your subject, whether you want to even put less on a slide, keeping it as simple as possible. So one idea on a slide so that there's a lot of space and they focus on what's most important. Enhancing with appropriate visuals. Again, making sure that that visual mode is there in the video. Gesturing as possible. And then emphasizing keywords orally, all supported with the linguistic. So if you can use this concept, KISS your lecture, to try to make sure that you incorporate multimodality in your video or in your tutoring and English corner. So I want to give you a moment, and I want you to think about your topic. How can you use these different modes? You may not be able to use all of them, but I'm curious. I want you to think about your topic, and I'll give you a minute or so to put in the chat. How might you use the visual mode, or the oral mode, or the linguistic mode, or the gestural mode, or the spatial mode? Take a moment and put your ideas in the chat. Because of time, I won't give you too long to do that, but I want to give you a minute. answer questions in the chat as well, whichever you feel most comfortable with. Thank you. I see the claps. I appreciate that. Are there any questions?
Dr. Graham.
Yes.
Hi, this is CJ from NCKU because Dr. Tsai has another meeting to go to, so I'll take over what he left
wonderful.
from the beginning. But I go through your presentation. Thank you so much for your lovely presentation. I'm glad to see the reaction from our teacher assistants response that they can do, or with some help they can do it. I think that I'm pleased with the outcome of today's presentation. I do have one more questions for you though.
Yes.
Because they are being, I think TA today is being treated as a teacher, right? So the content they receive is not like less than the teacher. I think I had your presentation last time you talked to our faculty. I think pretty much the teacher assistants. But as an assistant, how they are coordinate with their teacher? How do they have to discuss with their teacher, or how they help a teacher with get the students to better goal, to achieve the goal they both achieve to the same outcome for the same class?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So you're right. There are some similarities between this presentation and the last presentation that I did for faculty. I would say that the difference is that TAs are going to be working with smaller concepts. And also, whereas the faculty may be doing some of those higher level things on the blooms, generally our TAs are going to be on the lower end. So I would say that's the difference. And that's why I gave like less verbs than I gave to the faculty. But in terms of the relationship between the TA and the professor of course is going to lead and is going to say like, these are the topics we're going to cover. And often depending on the professor, they may give something very specific, like I need students to be able to do this. They may give a clear outcome, but I'm going to guess that more often than not, the professor is going to say, oh, teach students about a broad concept. So then it is going to be upon the TA to try to break that into parts. So whether, again, if they're making videos, because I was told that the TAs would either be making videos or working in English Corner. That's the information I got before this presentation. But every professor uses their TAs in different ways. So everything is going to come from the professor. It's always going to be the professor drives the agenda. If the professor says, we're going to be working on this topic, then the TA works within that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody has any questions regarding to today's workshop?
How do we handle a scenario where one student is oversharing or taking over the English corner? That's a really good question. Okay, so one of the things that it depends on what activity you're doing, because I'm not too clear on what English corner might entail. But let's assume that like there is some guided practice. If you are clear about the procedure up front, like I will give you 2 minutes to do this. And then at 2 minutes, I will stop you. As long as everybody's clear up front, then what you can do is that if they're taking over, again, you can kind of stop it there. That's one technique. Let's say that it's more open. You might want to, if you have a board, you can keep marks. You can have everybody's name and then like mark when somebody shares. And then when the next question that you put out or the prompt, you can say, I want to try to hear from somebody here to try to avoid the person from taking over the English quarter. These people haven't said anything yet. So if you do procedures like that, either stating you have this much time and I will cut you off, so they don't feel like it's rude. The rules were set at the beginning. Or you have on the board like who has participated and who hasn't, then you can of course say, okay, I want to hear from these people. They don't have as many marks yet. As for the oversharing, hopefully those procedures can help, but everybody has personalities, so you'll have to work with those people as well, and do your best to direct the conversation. I hope those 2 tips help. Any other questions or clarifications that you need?
Any more?
What about the reverse case? Can you explain, what do you mean reverse case?
Nobody talking.
Oh, nobody's talking. Okay. A student struggling too much while expressing itself. Got it. Okay. So one of the things that you can do is one of the things I told the faculty earlier, and I do this in my classes, is I let students talk to the person next to them first. So for example, maybe I give a question, like say, I want you to list, this is non-academic, but list 3 foods that you like, okay? Tell the person next to you, because that can feel safe. It can feel safe if I'm just talking to the person next to me rather than talking to the entire group. Then once they've had time to talk to the person next to them, you can call on people because they've already had time to practice. So actually they will feel less self-conscious because they've already practiced it once. They've already received affirmation that they can do it, and then they just need to do it one more time. That can be helpful. If they're having trouble just expressing themselves in general, even with that strategy of talk to your partner first, then share, try to give them as much support as possible. For example, if you can give them, like, I want you to just fill in this sentence and give them some of the words to help, and they just have to fill in one part, that can be helpful too. Much like what I showed you in the video. After today's video, you should be able to and just fill in the last part. By having that support of that language, that might be helpful too. And so hopefully, that should give them the support they need.
Great. I think because of the timing, so